Welcome to the Knock-On Effect podcast, where concussion meets conversation, with Adam Wood and Cliff Butler. Brought to you by Safeguarding You and the Melbourne Headache and Concussion Group. Let's get into this. Welcome back to the Knock-On Effect podcast, where concussion meets conversation, and the show that unpacks what really happens after a head impact. Today we're joined by renowned neuroscientist Dr Alan Pearce, one of Australia's leading concussion researchers. He's been at the centre of a national conversation on brain health, and most recently his voice has been heard around the Eli Katoa incident, which has sent shockwaves through the NRL and grassroots sports. Alan, it's great to be here. Thanks for being with us, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Excellent.
I think we're all a little nervous, actually. You fancy studio. We're used to shooting this in Zoom with, I've got my floor drobe in the background, and I've got got that covered with a lovely knock-on effect screen. But and then we've got Al here, who for me is a massive inspiration to me. The body of work that he does, the scientific rigor that he has. Really has influenced me and on my journey with concussion, which is evolving every day. Al's always generous with his time. Whenever I ring him up and say, can I pick your brain about something, he's more than happy to chat. So it's really exciting, I think, for us to have Al here, leader in the field. And I think the one thing, people obviously see you on Channel 7, or they might see you on Instagram. I know you've ramped that up a little bit lately. But for people who maybe don't know what it is that you do, can you just give us a bit of a spiel around the background, your background, how you came to be working in concussion and in brain health, and just a bit about your research, and be awesome.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm originally from Perth.
We won't hold that against you.
No, that's right. A good old sand groper from way back. Did all my studies in Perth. So I did a Bachelor of Science. I did an honours year, which started me off with, learning the techniques I still use today in terms of what I do in the lab. Then went to University of WA for my PhD in the Department of Medicine and completed studies. My whole PhD was on this little muscle here, what it did in terms of control. How the brain changed in terms of what type of movements this muscle was involved in, whether it's a power grip, pincer grip, abduction, adduction, because back in the 1990s, we were still trying to work out how the brain, reorganized itself for either healthy states, so learning skills, or in diseased or injured states where it had needed to reorganize, and what we now call neuroplasticity. So a lot of that work under my supervisors was very much some of the pioneering work to what we take advantage for neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So essentially what I did was I used this technique known as transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's been around since about 1985. It's stimulating the brain, looking at waveform responses, which we call evoked potentials. And essentially we can have a look at the integrity of the central nervous system in health and disease. And so, I've been using this technique now for nearly 30 years, but it's probably been in the last 16, 17, I've used it specifically for brain injury, because I wanted to go into the stroke space and work on how the mechanisms of recovery and rehabilitation have on the brain. But that never happened. And so I kind of fell into concussion. When I moved to Melbourne in 2000, it took a number of years to get my foot in the door. I kind of got that foot in the door at Epworth under John Olver, who was a rehab physician there. But it was a bit of a dog's breakfast of a research study, so it didn't really go anywhere, which was a bit upsetting. But I then moved to another university, Deakin University, around 2011, and there was a PhD student who played football. And he I just said, look, this is what I'm doing and what I'm going to look at. And he said, well, what about concussion? And I said, well, yeah, of course I've been interested in thinking about concussion, because at that point in time there was this strange disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy starting to be talked about, but it was only an American disease. It was only in NFL players. There wasn't much about it. No one knew much about it.
There was no T-shirts.
No T-shirts.
No T-shirts.
But, there was obvious pushback that this was only ever going to be an American disease and there's nothing to worry about. But anyway, long story short was that this student introduced me to a player manager who was very passionate with a lot of players in the 1980s and 1990s, who was starting to get anecdotal reports of these footballers now struggling with behavioural issues, cognitive impairments. Some had movement disorders, but he had no one to do the science. And so we came together in 2011, and I guess the rest is history, really. So I started doing work with these retired players from about 2012, and I started to see some real issues very quickly in terms of the physiology of the brain. So while cognitively they were, there were some issues, concerns, you wouldn't suggest that there was any major issues, but what I was starting to see in the physiology of the brain was almost what I was seeing when I was helping when I was a PhD student, helping the postdoctoral fellow with stroke.
Wow.
And I'm just like, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So it was certainly the curiosity in me started to really pick up.
Yeah.
We've got something here. So published the first paper in 2014, which was on Australian rules football players. The key in that one was that it wasn't just the elite ex-AFL/VFL players. It was club players that were showing very similar outcomes as well. 2017 published the first NRL paper on retired NRL players, so just the elites. And then sort of from there also have looked at return to play timelines. So in 2015, worked with the Hampton Rovers, found that the timeline of recovery was much longer than what was expected at that time, which was about 7 days.
Yeah.
And we were seeing, probably post 14 days at least, that there was something not quite right in terms of abnormal brain activity. And so, yeah, I mean, I've done plenty of others, but they're the sort of the key milestones early on.
That's a great. So much to unpack there. Sorry,
I
wish I had a pen.
You've just stepped perfectly into the next segue, mate. I guess the purpose of this podcast is to try and help educate players, parents, coaches, clubs on ways to be proactive, pragmatic, evidence-based in the things they do at a club. Clearly, education and awareness is a much needed element to all this.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what does the science say about how we should be managing concussion at a grassroots level? Because it really inspired by what you've done at the elite levels, but we're spending a lot more time around community clubs. So really keen to see what advice and what sort of science can indicate, in the junior level, not just junior, but
we talk about 7 days. You said there. I mean,
well, that was the previous. So I'll answer your question at second.
Sorry, yeah.
You can blame Cliff for just jumping in all over you, but don't worry about it. It's okay. If you talk to a medical historian, they will tell you that in the previously up to about the 1980s, particularly in rugby, it was a 4-week stand-down period. And in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was a change in terms of, I guess, the response to recovery being an aggressive return to play management strategy, as they called it. And it was led by Paul McCrory, who was the chair of the Concussion in Sport group for nearly 20 years until the most recent one, which we can unpack later. But it was very much, symptoms resolve in 7 days. So therefore, that's our evidence that you really can go back and play in 7 days or maybe 10 at the most. And that's kind of the concern that, we were starting to see with players having longitudinal effects because they were starting to come back too soon, getting repetitive injuries, and I guess concerns around multiple concussions. So just to jump forward to your question, one of the problems that we've had in the most recent years is the introduction of the 12-day for AFL or 11 days for NRL. Use the same science, but hey, let's have 12 and 11, same, different. But one of the things that was, I obviously was I would agree with was that in the previous consensus statements, when there was no return to play timeline, there was a very clear consensus that children and young adolescents needed double the amount of time to return to play. But when the AFL and the NRL brought in the 12 days, it automatically defaulted to everyone in the field, everyone at every level, I should say. So what I was hearing from a lot of coaches and parents and all that was, it's 12 days. So little Johnny, little Jenny can now return to play by next week. And I'm like, no, hang on a moment. We still need to be considering longer timelines for kids. And so that's just something that we've got to try and I think it is starting to get addressed now with the Sports Commission bringing in the 21 days, because I think they have seen that there was some real concerns around kids particularly returning, very quickly, almost too quickly after a concussion injury, which is a brain injury. So we've got to remember it's a brain injury. It's not just a head knock. It's not just a very, a very, I guess, minimal injury that we can just, dismiss and think,
we always say, like, if you get a hamstring, you're out for 4 weeks. That's right. If you get a brain
we treat hamstring more seriously than we treat brain injuries.
You raise a good point about the concussion guidelines. The ASCs and the AFL have introduced their own as well. We know at a grassroots level, there's still a lot of confusion and uncertainty around what practices, what do I do, what are the protocols to follow. Yeah. What are some of the non-negotiables that you think that club committees, coaches, team managers, trainers, what do they need to know about? What are the most non-negotiable factors or elements that a club should enact sideline assessment in the moment?
In the sideline assessment?
At the game? At the time when there's a potential knock?
If there are any signs or symptoms, that's it. You're out of the game. No more return to play. Even if you feel like your symptoms have resolved, I feel good now, I'm okay, you cannot return to play.
And the CRT6 form is now a way that, because from my understanding, the SCAT6 was for medically trained people. The CRT6 can be, in theory, a parent or a trainer to conduct
a pocket guide, which gives those signs and symptoms.
And the signs are red flags and symptoms they're two different things.
That's right.
Right. Exactly. And a red flag is more urgent, get straight to hospital, potential signs of a bleed.
That's right.
And a symptom is definitely don't play, but you may be able to manage it, go and see Cliff. And get a proper diagnosis.
Yes, that's right. So it's very much, if there's any doubt, you sit it out. As simple as that. I can't elaborate any more than that, really.
Okay. And the recognise, remove, refer is the
it's sort of part of that whole if in doubt, sit it out, mantra. So if you recognise the signs or symptoms, remove, and then get them referred.
And there's concern around, or there's a lot of talk around, or perhaps confusion around the first 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
What should and shouldn't you be doing in that period of time?
Well, 24 to 48 hours is that time for rest. So having the brain at least just, if there's any inflammation, that'll be the critical period. So having a full rest. And that doesn't mean sitting in a darkened room, but just resting at home, just, looking at, observing for signs and symptoms. Is there any change in behaviour? Is there any change that might need to go to a doctor or a hospital? If there's any stimulation like watching TV or doing a little bit of stuff on the iPad or whatever, as long as there's no symptoms, that's okay as well. But it's mainly just rest, and then you can start to look at the active rehabilitation strategy after that. But it's very much, that critical period would be, you just can't risk it. Yeah.
And we talked about, obviously, before was, initially like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the 7 days, we've gone to 10 days, we've been at 14 days, we're now at 21 days, which I think we all need to understand is an arbitrary number. It's not a number where all of a sudden your brain is magically healed and you go back, Johnny hurt himself on Saturday here and he can go back on Saturday there.
Yeah.
Can you just, and we've talked about this previously, but they say that your first couple of podcasts are absolute rubbish, and I hope this one's better. But I've watched the first couple, and I think I'm the only one, and maybe my mum might have watched it as well.
Three views.
Two of them were me, and one was my mum. Can you maybe just take us through for parents at home, people listening, what's actually going on in that 21-day period with the brain? I mean, obviously, you know, that's your field of expertise. And why are we sitting out for 21 or potentially 30 for kids? And you know, why are we feeling good at 10 and what kind of goes on?
Well, as you said, the 21 days is arbitrary. Like, it's an arbitrary number, but it's a number that's at least trying to be safe in terms of having a good period of rest and rehabilitation and recovery. So, because everyone is actually, what we see from the research is individual. But it's still better to be on the cautious side and having the precautionary principle, even if someone recovers within, 8 or 15 or 16 days, because we've just seen too many case studies, incidences where we have let someone back too quickly and it's turned into a catastrophic situation. So we just can't afford that. So what we're seeing in that sort of acute period is this very, we talk a lot about it, and about it. It's the metabolic cascade of concussion. So you have this sort of release of molecules, neurotransmitters, flooding the system. Obviously, inflammation. You have a reduction in cerebral blood flow as well. It puts the brain under quite a lot, of vulnerability, in terms of, trying to, recover from the insult. And so you have this, influx of a whole bunch of different chemicals and trying to release that, trying to deal with that while still trying to work.
Yeah.
This is the problem. And this is why you see the disturbance in the neurological function and impulses, because you got all this flux going on and the nerves are still trying to generate, impulses to talk to each other. And so this is why you start to see almost like a shutting down of the CPU, because it's just not able to function properly. So, we've got to understand, what is happening in the brain for that period of time. And it does take a fair amount of time to recover. Now, the metabolic cascade of concussion model that we see is based upon animal studies.
Now, right.
From, Denny Brown from the 1940s and 50s and 60s, all this amazing work he did, unfortunately, in dogs and primates, where he did give them brain injuries and looked at how the recovery was. So we've got to take into account, animal model timelines versus human. And I think there sort of has been this, and this part is only my opinion, but there has been a misconception that when you do look at that paper, it has 10 days on the timeline. And so you see this sort of flux of various molecules and neurotransmitter releases and all that over 10 days in animal models. And I think we've misinterpreted that for humans, which I think does take longer. Not because we have bigger brains or whatever, but it's, anytime there is an animal study, you can't just apply it to humans. And, even between species as well, you can't do that. So we've got to, that's kind of what we're seeing. But the bottom line is that it's an individual response, and it's also prior history, age, sex, a whole bunch of other factors too that we've got to take into account.
Do you? Well, I mean, I don't want to jump around all over the place because there's so much amazing information coming out here. My head's like, I feel like I've got a concussion. My head's spinning. The one big question I have, and this is off script, is do you think that concussions are cumulative? Like in terms of, obviously, concussions in a quick succession appear definitely cumulative, right? But I'm seeing a few players that might get one season to season, and then their response in the second to the second one, even 12 months later, is much greater than the first one. So, is there some kind of accumulation going on here, or what do
we think so? This is what the evidence points to. Is that concussion history certainly has that exposure risk of concussion, like reducing that sort of threshold to get another concussion, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So, you're increasing your chances, I should say.
Yeah.
The severity tends to be worse, again, reported from the player themselves, and length of time to recover as well. So, that while there are, I guess, statisticians that will say that your risk of a concussion is not necessarily reflective of prior concussions, from a physiological perspective, we do see, a risk of further concussions because that threshold before things start to go wrong is seemed to be lowered, but we don't really know why that's the case.
Yeah, and so we obviously don't know how we then reverse that as well. Like if we go, because obviously relative rest is not kind of, fixing it. So whether there's some other way we can go about kind of bringing them back to maybe pre-concussion status.
We've never seen anything like that. Yeah. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's our next research.
That's, I mean, part of the problem too is that people who obviously, people that you see are obviously recovered fully from their concussions and that those prior concussions may still have an effect because they're still playing contact sport. So they're still getting the exposure to repetitive hits at subconcussive levels.
Right.
So that's something that we've got to think about here. But, when you look at some, very well-known players who've had a history of concussion and they've had 2 or 3, off, and, you look at someone like Paddy McCartney who had 18 months off after his 9th concussion, and when he came back, it's a great fanfare. I don't want to sound like a bit of a Debbie Downer, but I was quoted as saying that, look, he might last 2 or 3 matches, could be 2 or 3 seasons, but he's still got a greater risk than someone who's never been concussed. And unfortunately, we saw what happened in his last concussion, which looked very innocuous. I thought he scratched his eye.
So did I. Yeah.
And, he then went down. He had to be carried, literally carried off. And we found that he had a brain bleed. So, that's why I guess I'm sort of on that precautionary side, which obviously puts me against a lot of other people.
Yeah, and I've noticed just on that, at club level, I find it much easier to communicate with kids now because there's so many more examples of professional, football players that they can identify with, whether it's from Paddy, go back to Justin Kaczynski, to Brayshaw, to Nathan Murphy. Yeah. Kids can relate to it now. They can actually relate to what are we actually talking about. We were doing baseline testing this year, and I had the group of under 15 kids there, and I just mentioned those names, and I said, what's the one thing in common? 3 kids put their hand up and said medically retired for concussion. So there's this awareness growing at that base level. Obviously, there's more to do, and these guidelines help. As unrelated to the professional athletes, can we tackle the issue that you're representing on your T-shirt? You've mentioned it a few times now. CTE.
Yep.
What is it?
Okay.
And is there a correlation or a connection, or does the science suggest that there is a connection between multiple or consecutive concussions that lead to CTE? Can you? There's depends on what you read as to what you hear about that. Yep. Can you share your thoughts on that, mate?
All right, so let's define CTE first. So it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's a neurodegenerative disease. So think of it like a dementia. Basically, in CTE, you have a release of a protein called tau, T-A-U. And tau is really important for structural integrity of the brain cells or the neurons. But when it's released, it becomes toxic. And it also starts to sort of what they call hyperphosphorylate. So it starts to it just starts to go out of control metabolically. And so it starts to spread through the brain tissue. And that's why you start to see degeneration of the brain generally. So it's very similar to, Alzheimer's, for example, but it starts in a different part of the brain. With Alzheimer's, we don't really know why the tau is released. And there's also beta amyloid as well, but let's just stick to tau. We don't know why it's generally released. If we did, we could cure Alzheimer's. But in CTE, we know what the driving factor of that is, and that's physical trauma to the brain, because in Alzheimer's, it starts in the very deep parts of the brain which are associated with memory. So you can tell someone who's had Alzheimer's. I suppose you've had experience with family members, maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas with CTE, it starts in the outer part of the brain. And so you start to see a whole bunch of different types of signs and symptoms more than just memory. So there's irritability, there's aggression, there's inability to make decisions, there's possibly movement disorders as well, a whole range of different things. And two people may not be exactly the same in how they present, and that's what makes it super difficult. So how we diagnose CTE is the fact that if you going to draw on the table just
need a whiteboard.
But, yeah, that's right. But if you know that you've got the sort of the mountains and the valleys, that gives the brain the convoluted, and you have the mountains or the hilltops, which we call gyrus or gyri, and you have the depths, which are the valleys, which are the sulci or sulcus. The definition of CTE is that it's the hyperphosphorylated tau at the depths of the cortical sulci, right at the very bottom, around a perivascular space, so around capillaries and things like that. If you look at a slide of an Alzheimer's, the tau tends to be very uniform, up and down, just this very clear brownish stain that people like Michael Butler do at the brain bank. But if you look at CTE, it's clumpy, it's not really uniform, it's very much around these spaces. And the reason why we are hypothesizing and showing evidence of physical trauma is because the gyri are tethered to the skull or the meninges of the brain, so they don't move as much, relatively speaking.
Right, yep.
Whereas the sulci, if you think of it like a pendulum, that's where most of the movement of the brain tissue is when someone is getting collided with or tackled or hit in the head or whatever. That part moves, and that's where the tau gets released and then starts to spread. What we do know now in the last, we've again suspected, but probably only in the last 2 years now that we've actually got evidence Boston, from Glasgow, and one of my studies that was published earlier this year, that it's an exposure risk. It's not a concussion risk. So multiple concussions doesn't appear to be a risk factor for CTE. It's the exposure to tens of thousands of subconcussive impacts over a career that is associated with CTE risk and CTE risk severity. So, for example, in the Dansheva paper by Boston, who were the first to show this, they had sensors in the helmets of the NFL players, and they had the brain tissue from the deceased NFL players. And they were able to show that the exposure from the impacts in quarterbacks, the longer they played, so they had high school, college, and NFL, so the longer their career, quarterbacks had a fourfold risk of CTE. Defensive linesmen, and you know where they sit in the team, had 111-fold risk of CTE and risk of stage 3, 4, high stage CTE from just constant hitting. So concussions aren't great, but they're not necessarily the driver for CTE risk. So we have lots of players who've said, I've had 50 concussions, and, are quite happy, normal, if I can say that word. But we have people who've never had a concussion, develop CTE symptoms, suspected CTE, which is then being confirmed at the brain bank.
Right.
So we need to treat these two things separately. We need to have policies for CTE and guidelines and management for CTE, and making sure that players are not being, because there's a whole bunch of risks anyway with concussion. But we haven't got one, but we need to have a policy and guidelines around CTE as well.
So Al just leads us into question to question really here, because we've got them. This is fantastic. So obviously, we're working at local clubs and potentially involved in coaching or on boards or committees.
Yeah.
So what are we doing at a local level, or what's the best thing we can do at a local level? And like we've said, we don't want to stop football. You love football. You love sport. You love all sport. You're a sport lover. But we want to make sure that we're minimising the risk of these things happening to people. We want to make sure that concussions are concussions in themselves are managed appropriately, the players return safely. But also, is there anything we can do from a training perspective? Because this is what it sounds like we're alluding to, that kids are going to training, doing markers up or scrimmages, etc. There's been some talk about maybe limiting contact to 15 minutes a week or eliminating contact completely until 14. So what's the evidence and science saying around that as well?
So for mitigating CTE risk, the data shows that if you have modified sports, and not banning sport, but modifying sport to non-contact versions until the age of 14, you basically take out, 8 to possibly 10 years of potential contact, repetitive contact, which significantly reduces the risk of CTE. And we've seen that at the brain bank too. So the brains that we see with CTE, their histories show they started full contact at 6 or 7 years of age. Those who started at 15 or 16 years of age, and we have their brains for other reasons, don't show CTE. They might show some damage, like white matter axonal damage, glial cell damage, whatever. So there might be some wear and tear, but it's not CTE. We're clearly seeing that sort of evidence coming through worldwide as well. And so, the question that we have to think about and address is, are we politically strong enough to modify sport for kids? They still get to learn, and this is my argument, is that they still get to learn all the fundamental motor skills: running, catching, evading, changing direction, kicking, throwing, psychological resilience on dealing with team members and winning and losing. They just don't have to have the incidental contact the whole time. And so, we still see across the board examples of people who come into the sport later still becoming elite professional athletes. And if we just use football example, we see a lot of players coming in, starting football at mid-teens rather than at 6 or 7, winning premierships at maybe in their late 20s rather than in their early 20s. We don't see retirements at 20, 21 years of age of players emotional because they can no longer play the sport they love, but they can't even go down and play a kick-to-kick with their mates for fear of another brain injury. And we see across the board as well that there is a change now around specialisation of sport to more general in order to have longevity in those sports. We don't want kids retiring, and then we're going off on a different track here, but we don't want kids stopping sport at 14 or 15 years of age because they're sick of it because they've done it already for 10 years. So that's the sort of stuff that we really need to
do you feel
about.
So I run a kick program at our local club. Their game days, I see under 8s, 9s and 10s. Like in the AFL, do you feel like they're moving towards this? Because it feels like that to me at the ground. Like you've got non-competitive, under 10s down, competitive, so tackling and all that is only introduced in the AFL world, after it's not the 14. No. Is there, and there seems to be a movement, a more risk-averse movement in sports. Some sports I imagine are harder to introduce that to, right? I imagine rugby and tackling, where it's the core of the game, might be harder. But are you seeing that there is a shift towards that? It's sport by sport. It seems to be possibly even association by association. I've done seminars where, you have one association say, we do that, and some next to them at the seminar looks at them and goes, oh, we don't do that. So it's doesn't appear to be consistent. But even like, for example, rugby, where, it's a core of the sport. Well, we can still do touch football, touch rugby, so that takes out. Like, it's amazing when, would you hit your kid in the head 5 times in the year?
No, you're not intentional. No way. No.
Yet we still seem to be okay with kids going out on the weekends and getting hit 10 times every weekend. Either directly or indirectly.
And I guess the language needs to shift, right? And I know you did a fantastic podcast last night, has been released. What's the handle for I've forgotten what that
286 Project.
286 Project. about the language needing to change. And that's clearly, we're in this amazing time at the moment, and you would have seen it from, when you, like you said, you first started, and we've progressed over 20 or 30 years. I feel like we're kind of there, but then I feel like there's a lot of like myths and misnomers going on as well. There's still a bit of he'll be right. There's still a bit of this. You still get parents coming up and asking trainers not to lodge it as a concussion because they want the child to play the next week. So obviously the language needs to change, and what we're talking about needs to change in that regard.
Yeah, massively. I first sort of experienced this in 2015, I think it was, or 2015/16. I don't know if you remember the Mumford incident where Shane Mumford ran through an opponent. I can't remember who the opponent was, and everyone lauded it as the tackle of the century.
Yes.
And so I tweeted out at the time, we should not be celebrating these sort of collisions as, because of our worry around brain injury. And only the week before, there was several players, or a couple of weeks before, several players over a few weeks who had to retire due to too many concussions. So I just said, you can't have your cake and eat it too here. And I was absolutely vilified by the mainstream media for the next 3 days. I had to defend myself because they're saying, what are you talking about? You should be able to say these sort of things. It's a completely legal tackle. And I said, yeah, it's a completely legal tackle, but the way that you're presenting this is that you're celebrating brain damage. Well, hang on a moment. So from there, it's been around how do we talk about this? And so, you don't see that sort of talk anymore in the commentary. They kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, heavy hit. He's going to be checked out, make sure that his brain is okay. He's going to have the head injury assessment. They've really, I think they've really changed it. I'm hoping that, that initial incident has led to where we are now, but also, downplaying of it as a head knock, humorizing the injury still needs to change. Making people thinking that it's fine, that I'll be fine, there's nothing wrong with it, and when you sort of frame it as a brain injury, people then start to take it far more seriously, and that's what we have to do.
Gary Lyon came out pretty loudly this year, I noticed, and said exactly that. Let's call it what it is. It's brain injury, not a head knock. And I feel like more of those voices need to be heard more consistently. But that does, clearly there is a change coming. Perhaps not quick enough.
Oh, we've got one today. So again, sounds like I'm stalking Al on social media. Obviously there was a post today. Was it in the Australian, or who was that said the head impact, and you were like, finally?
ABC had used the term head knock, and I sort of obviously went off, as I do. And then I also noticed that the Guardian had used head impact, and I know Jack Snape, from the Guardian, and has talked to him a lot around the language that we use. So, a number of people in the media follow me on socials, so it's kind of good to kind of, keep pushing that and reminding people around how we present this, because, you can't have a player out for, months or years because of a head knock. That's just not.
It's a big part of what this podcast is about, right? Awareness and education is what needs to change.
And culture change too, I think. So, we've got to get beyond just saying education, because what we find is that athletes, and again, this is not a blame on this, because athletes want to play, right? And they want to show how tough they are. But it can be weaponized. So education can be actually, what we've found is that it can be weaponized in how they can make sure they can get out of those head injury assessments. They know how to mask because they know what the doctor would, or the health professional is looking for. They know what to say, what not to say. They may try and sandbag the baseline testing. So we've got to change the culture around this, and that is around not downplaying the injury, but calling out for what it is. But it's also looking out for each other on the field, that, someone is hit and they're not getting up that quick. A teammate should be able to say, hang on a moment, we need some attention here. that sort of stuff. Even opponents, and I'm sort of starting to see a bit of that now too.
I saw it this year.
Opponents that just,
whether it's concerned parents.
Yep. Make sure that he or she is okay. So, rather than just sort of running on and going, took them out sort of thing, we're changing that. Yeah.
There was that moment, and I don't know the names like you do. I probably need to watch more sport, but where, I think it was the really handsome Broncos player that my daughter thinks is
Reece Walsh.
Yes.
Dead. This is dead.
Yeah.
Reece Walsh went over and when what was the other guy that got hit, and he went and grabbed him and hugged him and was like, "You're all right, mate. You're all right."
Yeah.
And that was that moment that I was like, I haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
This guy's got up, and it was actually a hard watch. He's got up. I think Ben is his name, the Broncos player, and he's got up, and he was clearly
Ben Hunt. Yes,
Ben Hunt clearly stumbling, and it was a really hard thing to watch. And the best thing was to see Reece go over, grab him, and whisper in his ear,
Stop.
"You're okay. Just stop." And that was a moment where you kind of go, maybe the message is. Maybe
Reece has been under a bit of pressure anyway too, because he got done for punching his mate on social media.
Yep.
And he was also in the middle of an issue in Origin 1 where the commentary was around, taking out Reece Walsh.
Yeah.
And using that sort of language. We're going to take him out. We're going to, make sure that he's done. We're going to kill him, sort of thing. And it was quite good because that piece ended up on Media Watch on ABC around the fact that, using that sort of language, aggressive, threatening type language in context of sport, while also saying that we're concerned about brain health.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it's a thing of the past, isn't it?
It makes me think of duty of care. Right? We think of duty of care as this abstract term that the leagues or the regulators or maybe the club officials. But in that moment, Reece showed that everybody from the club officials down to the coach, down to the players have got a duty of care for their teammates. And you're right, more of that needs to happen.
100%.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And at all levels too. So, it's a cultural change piece.
While we're on, and we'll just jump and also mindful of your time, mate, so we'll move quickly through this. But while we're on rugby, right, I'm a passionate, proud, paid-up Melbourne Storm member. The Eli Katoa incident a couple of weeks ago was sickening and has sent shockwaves through the NRL and all the way through to grassroots sport.
Yep.
What went wrong, mate, in that moment? Was it process? Was it human error? Was it the protocols? It's really made us question the protocols. These HIAs. Right? HIAs are meant to be the way in which we identify this and remove them from play. The fact that the initial incident was in the warm-up, how is a warm-up not being watched by the officials as closely as in-game activity? Yeah. What's your thoughts on that incident, mate, and what do we learn from it?
Well, it clearly shows that we've got a lot of work to do in this space. We talk a lot about how we've got, the best protocols in the world, insert sport to claim that their sport is the best. But, there's this real chest beating around, the best protocols in the world. But incidences like these show where the holes are lying. And so, there's the concern around not considering that concussions can occur in the warm-up. So that's one bit. The second bit is the fact that where was the medical intervention around that? And Tonga was sort of saying, oh, well, we didn't know. If we knew, we would have not let him play, but it was clearly on camera. There was a trainer there. So where was the communication there? We now find out that the independent doctors only come on when the clock starts for the game. And so, I've been fairly vocal publicly around the fact that they can afford to have doctors come in when teams are in. That should be there the whole time. It's not going to be a massive expense to pay a doctor to come out of their practice and be involved in that. Compensate them for their time properly, but they should be there in the warm-ups, because we know that concussions occur in training and warm-ups, and a lot of concussions and that happen outside of the actual game itself. So we need to be more vigilant there. And then I guess, it's the fact that he had multiple concussions in one game. I thought I was watching a game in 1985, not 2025, where a player was sent back out. So, this is, a failure on multiple levels.
Do you think this will change, or do you fear that this will just be another blip in the radar and we'll move back to waiting for the next major incident?
Yeah, good question. I think it will. I think you will see some changes, but some other area will be exposed. That people aren't thinking about, or that will never happen, and it does. So, for me, it's just not about returning the player after a concussion event. It's simple as that. That for me would eliminate all of these problems. And not having everyone expect that the HIA is the benchmark for return to play. It's still the doctor's decision. The HIA is only there as a tool to help make that decision. Yeah. And, there's a whole bunch of problems with I think anyway, from the SCAT 6, they try to make it better, but, paper and pencil tests are never as that good because it's still very much a subjective decision. But, it's only part of the whole process. So if there are clear signs, as I said, we've said before, that's it, no more. Yeah.
We talk about this at local level. Like from last year, we understood, I don't know the numbers of this year, but last year I think there were 4 local footy clubs sued by law firms for mishandling concussion.
Yeah.
And so the way we've talked about it is, you've got the carrot or the stick. Is you should have the carrot of wanting to put the kids or the players' health and well-being at the forefront.
Yeah.
But the stick is now a reality, right? If you don't necessarily do the right thing and you don't govern it, I imagine perhaps that might, fortunately or unfortunately, be the main driver, whether it's legal liability, insurances, these sort of consequences are clearly going to come as a result of, in this case, Eli Katoa and no doubt others.
Yeah.
You hope that that Eli Katoa incident, though, as much as we're all ecstatic that he's healthy and well and he's out of hospital, I think, and he's off it, does something good come of that in the fact that now everyone's seen it? You can't unsee it. We all saw it. I don't know how the doctors missed it, but anyway, we all saw it. So does that now change the narrative? Don't worry about the institutions, parents. Does that change the narrative for parents where they actually might start? Because I'm noticing in the clinic a number of young players coming in from local clubs saying, I think they're walking in and their appointment is, how are you today? What can I help you with? I think I'm concussed. So that's been a big shift I've seen in the last 12 months of young men going, I've got one brain. I love football, but I've got one brain and I want to make sure it's still functioning when I'm 40, 50, 60, etc. So I guess it's not, I would hope that incidents like this continue to get the public talking about it, seeing it and going, actually, no, we've got to start taking this seriously. And I would say hopefully, parents now start going, well, actually, no. And I know a lot of parents sit in my room and go, I'm sorry, Johnny, you can't play basketball this weekend because it's just not worth it, and hopefully that's something beautiful comes out of this tragic.
I mean, you're at the coalface, so.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you're so far into it, you need to zoom out, right? And look at where we are. Look at where we were 3 years ago. I mean, I just think about it being on the committee. Now, Play HQ have introduced concussion incident reports, right? So the player will be removed from the team sheet until they get, cleared to play. I think anecdotally this year I saw 3 games where parents from the opposition were concerned about one of our players that was on the ground and made their voice heard. We've just appointed a new coaching coordinator, Shadon, who's an absolute gun. He wants to drive concussion as a primary objective when we talked with our coaches in our pre-season coaching and TM briefing session. There are so many more tools and resources out there. I think we are seeing the change. And so when you're in the micro, you see what's not happening. But if we zoom out a little bit, I think I've seen, from my anecdotal experience, I am seeing big changes in behaviour, expectations. Yeah, we're still going to have your dinosaurs that, old school mentality. But if the majority outweigh and overshadow that old school attitude, I think that's where you'll start to see change.
Are we close to real-time assessment tools, do you think? Like in terms of, I know there's the mouth guards coming out that flash red, that kind of stuff. I know you love these questions. I know that, and the helmet one's coming. So, are we getting closer to that real-time assessment? Do you think?
Not really.
Yeah.
I think for me, real-time assessment will be, blood biomarkers, fluid biomarkers, so that's still a way off at this stage. A lot of people are talking about, various apps and, different types of tools, eye tracking, whatever. Again, they're part of the toolkit. So really, I mean, until we actually get something that is very as objective as a blood biomarker or a saliva biomarker, we're not going to. And so again, we just still have to have that precautionary element to it. So if someone isn't able to, or someone is expressing symptoms, that the signs might have been missed, but they're expressing some symptoms, let's just err on the side of caution. If they're doing a sway test or a King Devic or something similar, they, and it's not quite, you're not confident with what you're finding.
Yeah, 100%.
I think so. I mean, we just cannot risk, an incident, obviously like Eli Katoa, which wasn't technically second impact syndrome, but we can't have another second impact syndrome case because they're just massively devastating because it happens to young people. So it's second impact syndrome is where you get 2 or more hits in a fairly quick period of time, and that could be within the first week. So it's not just within minutes, but it does. Normally it's a teenager or a very young adult, and so parents are the ones who are most affected. That their kid's gone out to play sport and has never come home. Yeah. So we've got. That's why it's so important just to sit it out, but also it might not be second impact syndrome, but if they have an extra week off, it could let them keep playing until they're 30 instead of retiring at 19 or 20.
There's the impact on school and everything as well. And we heard from Luke in our last podcast that, I think he had 90 days off sport and we were writing, exemptions for him for his studies, so the impact is massive, and so there's time off sport, time away from being with your friends, that extra week might save you 90 days. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I think it's just that one more day, 2, 3 more days, an extra week, whatever it is.
It's not just return to sport, it's return to learn.
Return to life.
Return to life, right?
Yeah. And that's what it is. And obviously, Al, you were in a pretty sexy cap there, mate. I've actually got one myself, but I forgot to wear it today.
Wendy will not be happy with you.
Wendy is going to be very upset. I've got the running cap as well, which is fantastic, blue and black, looks brilliant. Tell us a little bit about Happy Lids, because we want to give them a plug.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Happy Lids is a charity that was set up by Wendy Smith, who her son Antonio passed away from second impact syndrome playing footy about 2 years ago now. He was concussed, or not concussed, but he had a fairly significant impact in the first quarter, got up and continued to play. Had a series of smaller hits during the game, but it was the fourth quarter where he had another significant impact and died on the field. And so second impact syndrome is where, as I said just before, you have 2 or more impacts in rapid succession. The brain swells with that second impact because after the initial impact, you have the brain in a vulnerable state. It's in an inflamed, as I said, about the whole metabolic cascade going on. And so a second impact can swell the brain, and you have that swelling and unfortunately death will be occurring within minutes of that. And so we've got cases around the world because it's very difficult to ascertain when the first impact happened. And so there has been a fair amount of pushback against second impact syndrome because people have never recorded the first impact. Said, it's just a freak accident. And so second impact syndrome hasn't been given enough attention.
Yep.
So Wendy has set up Happy Lids as a charity to raise funds through selling of caps that were designed by Antonio before he passed away. And some of the proceeds of those will go to the Concussion Legacy Foundation Australia to help with education around second impact syndrome, but also research and culture change as well.
So it's happylids.com.au, is it? Jump on there, get your hat. So the Concussion Legacy Foundation came out, and I'm going to quickly whiz through this because I know we've just got the flash of 10 minutes up there. They've come out recently, and obviously this one's close to me because I obviously do a bit of work with lacrosse and then work with those athletes. A lot of those players are wearing Q collars. Recently, the Concussion Legacy Foundation came out. I think they were relatively scathing of that, or that kind of jumped on it. So I guess what we're alluding to is are there things that players can do to protect themselves? Do you think the Q collar works? I promised a few of the players that I'd ask you about that today because they all wear them and want to know if they.
How much time have we got left?
No, we've got about 5 minutes. So yeah.
We'll come back to going deep on this. But just
all right. I can give you the short version. So Q collar is a piece of plastic that wraps around the neck. It was developed by a medical doctor who got the inspiration from watching a woodpecker and wondering why woodpeckers don't get CTE. Now, the idea around the Q collar is that it puts pressure on the jugular that keeps the cerebral blood flow pressure in the brain, apparently to reduce the amount of movement for a concussion, and or to, obviously maintain blood flow after a concussion. The problem is that the data that has been published prior to that, and myself and led by Professor James Smoliga, who's been driving this. He's got a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, but he's also got a PhD in physiotherapy. So he teaches in Tufts University, and there's basically him and a couple of other what we call science sleuths. So Elizabeth Bicker's one of them, and she's very well known for picking up errors in research papers, is that they've duplicated their data across different papers, so saying that it's military cohort and another paper with hockey cohort, and they had exactly the same data, means and standard deviations. So there was a real concern there, and we've actually, a group of us have written to the journals and asked for retractions. At this stage, there are 6 expressions of concern around the research that supports their findings. So it's a watch this space. But more recently, the Washington Post did a big expose on Q collar and showed that players were still being concussed. The FDA has warned Q collar to change their messaging around the fact that it's not a preventative device. But there are people who are saying, other medical doctors saying, we are still finding that it's got benefits. It's a very, state of flux right now. But we are still saying it is not a protective device.
Yeah.
And we are seeing NFL players, lacrosse players being concussed who think they aren't concussed because they're wearing a Q collar.
Does it speed up? Brady, does it speed up healing? Do you reckon, you can come back in a quicker time frame if you got one on?
That's a complete, for me, the science shows us complete misnomer.
Yep.
So, the study I published early this year, symptoms will resolve within a particular time, but brain healing from a physiological perspective still takes almost double the amount of time.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm so pushy on longer periods of rest. Yeah.
Well, I think you dodged the helmet question, mate, because I reckon we're running out of time. I know you love the helmet question about.
It doesn't.
Well, I know you love the answer to the question, but I think a foot moves in a shoe and a head moves in a helmet. That's
the brain moves in a helmet.
the brain moves. Yeah, so I don't think it's working. But did you want to do the lightning round? We want a quick fire, or do you want to? You're already skipped to the closing.
Well, I'm just mindful of time,
like
and I'd love to.
I
think let's do a lightning round quick fire of the myths, right? With one word answers.
One word answers.
And then maybe we can come back to these in more detail and get a better description or explanation of them on another pod.
Yeah,
We'd love to have you back. All right, so lightning round. True or false?
True or false.
And there is a theme to the answers, I notice. You want to start, mate?
If you didn't get knocked out, it's not a concussion.
You didn't get knocked out. It's hang on, you got double negative.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. There you go.
So if you didn't get knocked out, it's not a concussion.
It's not a concussion.
Is that true or false?
Oh, that's false.
That's false. Yeah.
You should avoid all screens and stay in a dark room for a week.
False.
If symptoms go away quickly, like you get up and you feel okay, it's safe to keep playing.
False.
Everybody needs to go to the ER.
That's a difficult one. I would say false, because you would have to at least, monitor symptoms. So, it's kind of fair enough.
Yep.
You don't want everyone trudging off to ER and sitting in the ER for 4 hours.
Yeah, and gumming up the ambulance.
Yes. Yeah.
You need to be hit in the head to suffer a concussion.
False.
Kids bounce back faster than adults.
False. Everything's false so far.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. Wow, we should have got one in there. There's one in there that was true.
Yeah.
But no, I think
You almost got me with the ER one. So maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think we just need to look after. I know that the system's under pressure at the moment, and I think I know that we're all really concerned. But as long as the main thing I think for me is if we're screening for those red flags and looking for those straight away. We're not saying don't go, but it's
Understanding the difference between a red flag and a symptom, right? That's an important part of this, in the moment sideline dilemma.
Yeah, definitely.
Alan, this has been amazing. Thank you, mate. I wish we had many more hours, but we'd love to come back to this again. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everything you do in this space. Keep up the good work, and we'll definitely see you back here again.
Great.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Al. That was awesome.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
mate.
Yep.
I think we
one other thing just to comment, guys, for anybody who wants to know more about this, we'll in the show notes we will post links to all the relevant sources, the AIS Play HQ, Safeguarding You, Melbourne Headache and Concussion Group, Al Pearce's own Instagram and social feeds. So you'll be able to find out a lot more information just by following the show notes.
Fantastic.
Anything else?
That's it.
Done. Legend. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Al.